Welcome to the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Trish.
And this is our podcast. We talk about wrestling news and various topics from different promotions, primarily AEW, but also New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, and topics from around the wrestling world. Whatever we find interesting, and we hope you will too. We are a proud member of the Social Suplex Podcast Network, and you can find our content on our podcast feed, the Social Suplex Podcast feed, as well as on Twitter and YouTube. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. We also have a store at Chopped Tees, so if you'd like to support us or just own a really cool quality piece of merchandise, please take a look at shop-tees.com/Trish and Sarah. We are also happy to announce the Social Suplex newsletter, which is published every other week and available at socialsuplex.com free of charge. It contains insane amounts of news from dozens of promotions across the world, as well as features from some of today's best wrestling writers. Please check that out again at socialsuplex.com. It is Sunday, August 17th, 2025, and Trish and I are here to kick off our conversation with a discussion of Brock Lesnar's return to active WWE roster status, I guess would be the best way to describe it. 2 weeks ago was SummerSlam and night 2, and at the end of the Cody versus John Cena match, which was either a 5-star classic or one of the worst matches ever, you figure that out yourself. Brock Lesnar's music hit. He came out. He gave Cena an F5, and then that was the close of the show. Brock Lesnar has not appeared on WWE TV since then. Cena has been busy building a feud with Logan Paul for the Paris show. It's not Clash in Paris, is it?
Yeah, Clash in Paris.
Well, they really do a good job of coming up with new and interesting names for these things, just like their AI bullshit graphics. So he's been off TV, but he is now apparently going to be facing John Cena at a show that is to be named at a later date, but will be going up against All Out for AEW in Toronto on September 20th. So we'll talk a little bit more about the counter-programming strategy. But Brock Lesnar's return was pretty fucking disappointing. Dave Meltzer broke the news that he has not been suspended. He's been being paid the entire time that he's been off television. He's been off TV for over a year and a half now. It's about 20 months. Ever since he was named 44 times in the Janelle Grant lawsuit. He was not directly sued, but the discussion and the case layout and the text messages and everything that came through about Brock Lesnar's involvement with Janelle Grant and with Vince McMahon made him look like an absolute piece of shit. So he was not on TV, but apparently WWE now feels that enough time has passed. They apparently had their legal team, quote and unquote, clear him, although what he was cleared from is not clear. And some of the stuff that's come out this week from various WWE personalities that's been leaked suggests that they don't feel that there's an issue as long as there is no criminal charges that have been filed. Although to this point, Vince McMahon still remains off TV, although I think at this point we can just assume it is a matter of time before Vince returns to WWE television. There's a lot of places to go with this. Trish and I were both pretty fucking disgusted when this happened. I think we shared a lot of the same thoughts that a lot of people across the internet wrestling community did. Unfortunately, not fucking everybody. There were a bunch of people on that Sunday night who were quick to point out that Brock had not been accused of anything criminal, as though that was somehow make this okay. And it was really kind of disgusting to watch folks jump as hard as they could to please WWE by making sure that this was downplayed as much as possible. Trish, when you found out that Brock was back, what was your initial thought?
It's hard because there's different reactions, right? So you have the emotional reaction of, I can't believe they've done this, the kind of the disappointment, the disgust. And then you have the secondary of, okay, so what's changed? And, has something changed in the case that's allowed for him to be brought back in terms of, the ongoing civil lawsuit? Looks like there is nothing changed, as according to Grant's legal team. In the case. So
yes, they were quick to put a statement out the next day because there was some hypothesizing by different pundits that perhaps they had come close to a settlement or they were close to reaching a settlement with Vince McMahon about this lawsuit and or WWE. And Ann Callis was quick to put out a statement that there was nothing changed about the case itself.
Yeah, and then it's a case of when you listen to the feedback of others. So when Dave Meltzer says that he is cleared by WWE legal to return, what does that actually mean? Has he been cleared of any wrongdoing? Do we know that? Has there been anything official from WWE? The answer is no. Or is he just been okayed to return? And then what? If this case goes to discovery, is he then going to get pulled again? Is he still, because even if they think he has no case of wrongdoing, he's still a witness in this case, surely.
Yep.
And then it's a case of what will happen here, what will be the reaction. So those are the kind of things that I think about, because, I can't think about one thing at once.
No.
I'm always thinking about 10 things at once. But so those were kind of my immediate thought processes. And then what kind of, I think I was caught out by was, in the immediacy, was the reactions from quite a lot of people in terms of he's done nothing wrong, or he's not involved in anything, or, it's all, kind of cancel culture and all that sort of stuff. And I found some of the replies, especially to, some of the just tweets from Brandon Thurston, who's just putting out, actual information.
Yeah, facts.
Facts, yeah. And I found some of them kind of really disheartening, and it made me think about how we look at crimes towards women, to be quite blunt and honest, such as sex trafficking or sexual assault or anything like that. And I think that's kind of a commonplace concern, socially at the moment. And yeah, so I think the first couple of days, I think that was the big thing, was just reading kind of all the responses and that sort of thing, and how quick people were to kind of rush to be like, oh, well, there can't be anything wrong, without acknowledging that this is somebody that is named 44 times in a sex trafficking lawsuit, who, is alleged to have received personalised sexual content from Janelle Grant at the coercion of Vince McMahon, who was alleged to have been agreed to meet Grant for a sexual encounter that ultimately never happened, firstly because of being drunk, and secondly due to blaming on the weather. And then, it was supposed to be involved with WWE contractual negotiations. That's the claim, right? That it was part of Brock's next contract. And then you have the questions around the culture, which I thought was the big question on that as well, was, is this something that happened often? Is this something that just happened with him? Is this something... So there's so many other things, and after you kind of have that initial disappointment of watching kind of the reaction to thing and that kind of thing that kind of pulls you down, my next biggest thing was the way that WWE behaved around this.
Yeah.
So, and the only word I really have for it is cowards.
Yeah.
Complete cowards. So you cancelled the press conferences on the Saturday. And I know it's annoyed a lot of people that were in town who were due to go to those from different outlets. I think there's been numerous stories about the way that media, content creators and journalists were treated during SummerSlam weekend, speaking to people that were there as well. I've heard similar. But this was a completely cowardly response. There was no statement. There was nothing to say, look, we've looked into this, and we've cleared we've had our lawyers clear this, and we think, it's now time to return. No, it's nothing. So instead, we cancelled the press conferences, and I can see why they would do that, because they don't want any questions on this, right?
No.
They don't want anything that can affect their sponsors, because that's ultimately what got rid of Vince McMahon the first time.
Yep.
Was Slim Jim. It wasn't, reaction of the public. It wasn't the reaction of kind of media or anything like that. It was Slim Jim. So you don't want anything going into media that could then put pressure onto your sponsors. They could put pressure onto you. But also, if you remember the first press conference after Vince McMahon, the lawsuit came out and he left the second time, Triple H got a question from Brandon Thurston, and his answer ended up kind of making mainstream news.
Yep.
So they didn't want any of that this time. So rather than kind of facing anything head on and addressing the issue and then being able to talk about all these things, what they did was we're just going to not do it, we're not going to answer anything, and we're going to be cowardly. And then Triple H wants to go out onto the post-show and basically blame John Cena.
Yep.
For Brock Lesnar's return, rather than talking about any of the issues or taking, basically just, you're happy enough to be the guy that goes out and opens every pay-per-view show. Maybe you should go out there and explain why your company has made this decision, seeing as you are the public face of that corporate brand. Even though, Nick Khan holds more power, you are the corporate face of it to the fan base.
You made yourself the corporate face of this. You put a lot of effort, time, and energy into making yourself the public face of WWE, so that when people think about WWE, they fucking think about Triple H. And instead of coming up with any kind of acknowledgement or responsibility or anything, no, it's what John wants. John really wants this to be, what did he say? He goes, this
He
is
said-
John Cena's
yeah.
wish list. Like, fuck you.
That's just so poor from a corporate level as well, because you're blaming another, you're blaming an independent contractor in that regard.
Right.
For a decision that was taken by the company. John Cena can wish whatever he fucking wants, at the end of the day.
Sure.
If he was, like, in favour of this, and he's made it very, very clear that he does not want to be associated with this decision.
Yep.
On multiple occasions since. But even if he was like, oh, I'd like to wrestle Brock Lesnar, it's not his decision. He doesn't make decisions at the top of this company. So if you are a decision maker at the top of this company, then that buck falls on you. And you can then come back the next day and you can have Michael Cole say, oh, Nick Khan and Triple H made this decision to bring him, and they're using this quote to bring him home, right? That's the thing that we're using. And then Triple H goes out on ESPN once they announce the deal, which part of me wonders whether they obviously knew that was coming. I believe they did. I don't believe it was like very, very last minute. I think they knew. And then that gave them some cover to do this. But then he goes out on ESPN. He's like, oh, we hit him up and said time to come home, and he was into it, a massive moment for our fans, something that they wouldn't thought they'd get to see. And it's like, there was no further question on that, because there won't be, because ESPN's now a partner now, and you have that kind of dual influence now that's part of a problem. So there is no kind of media kind of assessment of this either, because there won't be, because they're invested in this product themselves. So they're not going to come out and like question him when he goes on there. But it's like, it's a coward. He's a coward. He won't face now, likely, any media that are critical of him until at least WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Because they don't have anything like, they don't even have like press junkets or anything for the rest of the year, because they don't have them in Clash. They're not going to have them Survivor Series because it's too near Thanksgiving. That's the traditional one. They're not going to have them Royal Rumble this year is where? Saudi Arabia? Yeah. So it's now going to be WrestleMania before anybody questions anything on anything. And so the idea is they have created this bubble where they can kind of control their media kind of outlook, and no one's able to question the decisions, but it's just cowardly. So you are not providing kind of anything to your fan base, you are not providing anything to your kind of your partners, but you're also not providing anything to the people that work there. And that's, I think, something that's not been talked about enough in these discussions so far.
Well, I think they don't have to give this media access, because they, like you said, are perfectly happy to have a bunch of folks who they leak some information to, who will then carry water for them. And like you said, make excuses and like, well, Brock didn't do anything illegal. Brock, everybody has different fetishes. Everybody, handles sex differently, all this other stuff. Like, he might not have, there's nothing in there that shows he knew she was being trafficked, blah, 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 blah. Like a lot of disgusting, just, and there's people and forgetting beyond that, a lot of people very happy to move on and let's forget about Brock and hey, what's going on with Karrion Kross's contract, right? Like that's the thing that folks want to talk about now, because it's a lot easier and they don't have to really think too hard about this or get themselves in a knot or get themselves worried about like what they're going to say. So it's just disturbing and depressing, because you have the national media, like you said, that's now like ESPN is in bed with WWE. They're not going to report on anything otherwise. And wrestling media, there are some folks out there who are determined to continue to do the good work and pointing this stuff out. But there's also just as many people who would be very happy for this to go away and never be mentioned again. And it's just fucking gross.
No, because at the end of the day, it's like, we don't know everything about his side of the case. We don't know anything about his side of the case. He's never spoken, right, Lesnar. Okay? But while this case is still ongoing, then, like, there should be no question that he's used. And if you have, like, definitive evidence of why he can come back, then you should be putting that out there. You should be, okay, it's not ongoing case, but you're saying that he's cleared enough to do this. So, but you're not making those statements. And then you make it worse, because then you do two things. So there's two things that have happened since, and it's like, you've got the company telling reporters, or doing interviews, and basically summing up how they don't care. So you mentioned the Nick Khan thing earlier. Yep. Where he basically says, I don't have a problem unless they have criminal charges, and that seems to be quite a commonplace thing through TKO. If you think about it, in recent years particularly, we've just seen Conor McGregor's going to go back into testing pool, just being found civilly liable, that's the correct term, of sexual assault. he's able to walk back in. No one's surprised by that. That's what happened. You know, if a UFC fighter on house arrest for domestic violence, he's going to walk back in.
Yep.
But he's got to fight, you know. Dana White can slap his wife.
Yep.
No penalty. WWE can hire Lee Fitting.
Yep.
Who was, you know, removed from ESPN through a number of allegations around inappropriate conduct, particularly towards women. They can hire Jamie Horowitz, who was sacked by Fox Sports, allegedly for his lack of, well, Fox stressed his issues with professional conduct, and the claims were that it was sexual harassment. So they have no issue with hiring these people or bringing them people in, absolutely, if there's no criminal charges. But that doesn't mean that these people are not part of wrongdoing. So it's like culturally, you are choosing to ignore these things for your workplace because you want these people in. And what message does that send? You know, I think Sean Ross Sapp had a quote that said they just simply don't care. They don't care. So they don't care if you're bringing any people in with all these allegations. They don't care that it seems to be focused as well on kind of behaviour towards women. And how does that make people in your workplace feel? How do the women in your workplace feel? I know Lance Storm spoke a little bit about that as well. And how we're not having that conversation. How many conversations have they had with their workforce? You know, by current accounts, doesn't seem like any. So you are not even communicating that with your own workforce. What does that say for your workplace? What does that say about your safeguarding? You know, all these questions that we had back in the start of 2024 are still there. They're not going anywhere because they're not being addressed, and they're not going to be addressed publicly because they don't want to, but they're not even addressing them with their own workforce. And I think that's just, it's quite a depressing state of affairs, especially when we just come off last month where, you know, the women wrestlers were used as part of like a counter-promotional tool. And now we can now waive off anything to do with kind of this sex trafficking lawsuit because they need to counter-program AEW. It's like, it's a really depressing message to send to your workforce, especially the women in your workforce. And it's an even more depressing message to send to everybody else as well. But then, and the way they've wrapped it up is to then wrap it up into what we've got going on socially at the moment. So straight away, everyone's kind of falls into it becomes very tribalistic, right? Yep. And then that's where you can get someone like Paul Heyman starting to talk about cancel culture, which is very, very similar to the lines that Cody Rhodes was using for any criticism for Saudi Arabia last month as well.
I just, you know, like, you want to dismiss this stuff. One of the things that I think about is how, you know, if Vince McMahon is so worried about his reputation and concerned about, you know, how this lawsuit makes him look, which is by all accounts what the concern is for him, and yet if he has text messages, etc., you know, excusing his behavior or making a reason as to why he behaved the way he did that counters the text messages that were in the lawsuit, we haven't seen him. Right? The same is true for Brock Lesnar, right? If he has text messages or discussions with Vince or something else that sort of excuses the behavior and makes it slightly less, or, you know, this was not something that was, we haven't seen him. Like, that's the stuff where I'm just kind of like, they're not even going to a place where they're trying to make it better. They're just saying, fuck you, we don't care, you monkeys are going to cheer anyway, you know, yay, WWE, Brock's back, woohoo. Right? And it's just, like you said, it's fucking depressing because you'd think we'd gotten to a point where if someone is accused of the stuff that Lesnar's been accused of, or someone's been mentioned doing the stuff that Lesnar's been mentioned doing, you know, somebody at least would say, hey, do we want to have this guy as part of our brand? Do we want to have this guy on TV representing us? And the answer is absolutely we do. Like, this is who we are. And as Paul Heyman said, you know, get over it. Okay, thank you very much. Get over it. Got it.
Yeah, but that's playing into this tribal thing that we have culturally going on, isn't it? Because we just dismiss these things now, and in a lot of ways, or it falls into, then you go into camps, like people, you have and then you get the allegation of, oh, you only care about it because you feel this way about this company, or you feel this way about this person, or this government, or whatever, and it's like, no, there has to be a line about human decency and the way that we treat each other, and how we kind of, you know, that you have to have lines in terms of, especially, you know, in this case, we're talking about the treatment of women in your workplace. And it seems to be that we're going backwards, and we used to make these excuses where we start to talk about kind of cancel culture or kind of, oh, they can do this and they can do that. It's not. But rather than talking about what's actually happened here, how are they ensuring that there are no further victims? How are they ensuring that there are no issues? But instead, this is what we talk about. And then you have with Brock especially, the other factors that have kind of people thinking is that he walked out when Vince went the first time. Right. He came back shortly after. But he was very much, I'm with him. So there's a loyalty factor there that people question. And then also the allegations that were made by Terry Reynolds. When she spoke about it a couple of years ago now, where she talked about him exposing himself to her as she walked past, knowing that he would go on to gain a lot of power. Basically, she said he knew he was going to have a lot of power, that we're going to give him the strap at that point. I've been in the business a long time. I have respect, and what he did was very, very wrong. From a sexual harassment standpoint, it was wrong. So it's not the only allegation in terms of sort of behaviour towards women against Brock Lesnar either. But that one obviously was never addressed. And because, again, there was no criminal charges, people think that we should just kind of accept behaviour, did they? Or did they just think that, well, I don't know. That's where it's difficult to think about. It's like we dismiss anything unless it goes through court, and we know how difficult it is for anything like this to go through court successfully. And even then, someone like Conor McGregor can be found civilly liable or something, loses appeal, and yet would still pretty much gets waved away by these companies. And it does make you think, in terms of the audience is watching. And I think there's a difference. So you maybe look at the WWE audience and think that anyone that's going to kind of question their kind of, we talked about this a little bit last time about their consumption. We talk about ethical consumption of the product, and think maybe anyone that kind of felt that way and wanted to think more deeply about WWE may be left with the Saudi Arabia deal. I think that was a breaking point for a lot of people. Is it a case that the people left aren't bothered by that the same way that when Conor McGregor fights in UFC, if he does, and maybe that's a question now that they're going up to Paramount, but that will probably be the biggest selling fight of the year if it does before then. So that's kind of something that we have to culturally kind of contend with. It's difficult. It's difficult to look at it and think, they're so reliant on kind of the moment culture. And does that allow for them to do basically whatever you want? And I think we've seen kind of different elements. I think we've seen, a rise on certain social media platforms of people talking about, well, I'm not going to watch this, and I'm going to watch AEW. And we've seen a flood of the TikTok videos, YouTube videos everywhere. And whether that's in direct relation to this, or whether it's just the product changing and the quality of the products changing between them, I guess you can decide. But and then you've got the other side where they'll get an influx of viewership, post SummerSlam on both Netflix and USA Network. So it causes the interest. So in the same way that when Vince McMahon, the first set of the kind of allegations came out, that episode was very highly viewed. So we live in this situation where you may have people that question things because of this, but you also have plenty of people that are willing to just ignore it and move on.
I think some of the stuff that was interesting coming out of this from a just gross, depressing side point of this was the fact that there was such an immediate pushback from Cena about, being used as the reason for why Brock was returning, which is sort of the kind of thing in WWE we don't see that much, where they sort of fight with each other through the press about what the angle is. That's something over the last few years they have not done that much. You have not seen that much. And then the flip side of that is, him not being on TV immediately, which I thought was interesting. But, given that they've decided to do the counter programming stuff, that's kind of crazy. The other thing was the thing that you brought up to me, which was, coming out of SummerSlam, what were the headlines, right? What were people talking about leaving SummerSlam? They weren't talking about Cody winning. They weren't talking about Seth winning or Punk winning. It was Brock, and like a redo of a lot of the stuff with Brock. And like you said, I had a lot of folks on my TikTok, which again is anecdotal, who were like, I'm done with this company. I'm not watching this. And I think the other thing to remember when you talk about like people saying, well, if I was going to say no to this company, I would have done it on ethical grounds. I would have done it with the Saudi Arabia thing. I think that's definitely true. But I also think you have to remember that WWE's picked up a lot of new viewers in the last couple of years. And I think there's a lot of them that may not be aware of some of these things, or may not, weren't here for when they had the Saudi Arabia stuff, don't realize that that's a thing. And obviously Saudi Arabia as a, sports washing has been really successful. So some folks may not see that as the line in the sand that others did a few years ago. And so this may be for some folks the first awakening of like, oh, WWE is a scummy company, right? They may not have known that to the degree that we take for granted the scumminess, because we've been confronted with it so often and for so long.
But they've been the beneficiary of we're the babyface company for quite some time now.
Yes.
Since Vince first left.
Yes.
So I think that's probably part of it as well, is that there's been this kind of acceptance, oh no, that like there's no chaos here and there's no drama here and that sort of thing, as opposed to, the competition and, look who's getting pushed and all that sort of thing. And it's one of them, I think they think they're immune to that now. And that's why their press runs that we saw at WrestleMania were so strange and so focused on everybody else rather than themselves.
Yep.
That's why we're seeing this closing up of kind of media kind of access, and now it's just going to be their selected outlets and the ones or their puppets, essentially, in some cases. And so you're going to see more and more of that, and they'll look to drive the conversation away. And the thing with the counter-programming discussion is, as soon as it got announced, that they're likely to be named Bad Blood is going to run head-to-head with All Out, the discussion moved from should Lesnar even be here to they're going head-to-head against AEW. And there's a perception thing in terms of, that's what we're talking about in terms of you're not babyfacing your company by doing that, but you're shifting the topic of discussion enough that there's like a acceptance.
Right.
Of Lesnar being part of that,
right.
Coming back in a couple of weeks before then to do a couple of SmackDowns or whatever, and we'll see what the reaction is there. But you've already got that acceptance because you've moved that discussion on.
Right.
So that initial kind of discussion, and maybe there wasn't so much of a discussion because, again, we have that tribal thing where there isn't only a discussion, right? It's just people just take the viewpoints. But it's like you can't even have that now because the acceptance is already there. The conversation's moved sideways. It's gone.
Right.
Any chance of that being addressed is gone. We know that. That isn't going to be addressed. You're not going to be able to question anybody on it, and no one's going to continue the coverage because they're more than willing to move on to the counter-program discussion or to move on to the carry and cross coverage or anything else that they're doing in order to make a distraction. So it's, and that's where we are really with that.
Yeah.
And
it's really fucking depressing.
Yeah. And obviously, they could come out and they could put out a statement, they could clear things up. Do I think they will? No.
No.
Because at the end of the day, they think that they can bring him back and it won't affect their audience, and that he offers them something that other people can't offer them in terms of their counter-programming exploits. And it's hard to kind of grasp that, and it's hard to grasp that we don't discuss any of the issues, and everything is about Brock or everything is about WWE versus AEW, and not about the victims in this, and not about the workplace culture and the attitude seemingly that we've seen in several hires now and several decision making towards allegations of sexual assault, sexual harassment, inappropriate behaviour towards women, and sex trafficking in this case, or being a beneficiary potentially of sex trafficking in this case.
I mean, you're talking about somebody who, at the very least, thought it was okay to be offered a sexual encounter, even if assuming best case scenario that this was a consensual sexual encounter, that this was okay for him to be offered a sexual encounter with a coworker as part of his contract renewal negotiations.
But that's what's alleged, that we can't.
Yeah, that's the alleged. I gotta say alleged, yes, alleged.
Yeah, but while it's still ongoing, that's where it all falls to pieces. Really, is that you're doing this while there's still this legal thing ongoing, and you're not addressing it. Okay.
I know.
But yeah, so the other thing that WWE had this week, straight after that, was the announcement of their ESPN deal conveniently very well timed. So that also shifted the conversation straight away from the Lesnar issue. And that was, so you want to talk? Yeah, you're better at talking it through. You talk it through.
Yes. So WWE. So WWE has the TV rights for SmackDown, the TV rights for Raw, the TV rights for NXT, all worked out the last year or so. They've made deals for this. What they didn't have worked out was their deal that they currently have with Peacock, which is for their PLEs, and I think their next day viewing, but I'm not sure if that's included part of this, right? So for the last however many years, the PLEs have been airing on the United States on the Peacock streaming service, right? This deal's up in 2025, so they were looking for renewal for this for 2026. There was a lot of discussion and sort of a base level assumption amongst a lot of people that these PLEs would be going to Netflix because the international viewing rights for the PLEs are currently on Netflix. So everybody not in the United States watches all the PLEs through Netflix. This did not happen. Okay, WWE ended up selling the five-year deal for the PLEs to ESPN to put on their streaming service, because they have a new app streaming service for ESPN, as well as potentially have some linear TV broadcasts of these events. There was like a debate about how many there would be and if that they would be and blah, blah, blah. But the idea being that you'd show it on ESPN2, it'd be on linear television for free to subscribers. The ESPN app is free to certain cable subscribers. So like I think, for example, if you have Comcast, you get it, but if you have another one, you don't. And of course, the ESPN is free to negotiate with these cable providers as to whether or not they'll allow part of this access to the streaming, now as part of the cable package. This was a big piece of the puzzle for Peacock, and I think part of the reason one of the reasons that led to WWE's success in the last couple of years is that Comcast subscribers, and Comcast is a very large cable company in the United States, if you subscribed to Comcast, you had a free Peacock subscription as well. So people who had a Comcast subscription were able to get the WWE PLEs for free. And Peacock has done a very good job of pushing out WWE content as part of their app. When you log into Peacock, for those of you that don't have it, there's a WWE icon on the left. It's one of the top things that they show. It's always there. It's very different than how Netflix has promoted their WWE content and promoted Raw. Like, they really have not done the same thing that Peacock has done. So this deal went down for $325 million per year average. These deals are never the exact same amount every year. They're usually escalating, which means the first year you get less and the last year you get more. It says there'll be 8 single night events, and this is pretty interesting.
Two double nights events. They got 2 double night events.
Oh yeah, 2 double nights events. Yep. Thank you. The piece that I find the most fascinating about this, and I think Trish and I jumped into right away, is the fact that unlike the Netflix deal, right, this deal involves broadcast on linear TV. And one of the things that's been talked about in regards to why the AEW deal with HBO and Max and TNT has been so successful is that they're simulcast on both the HBO Max streaming service as well as on TBS and TNT as a broadcast. And this may be something that's helping their growth as people are in that mid-process of switching from linear TV to streaming. Cable is hugely down and more young people have streaming, but not everybody does. And so part of what may be the issue with Netflix and Raw, the Raw ratings for Netflix have not been that great, pretty much. They certainly appear to be not what they were expected to be. And the question is whether or not having them only on streaming only has been part of the problem there, that removing wrestling from television has not helped with that. And it would certainly suggest this deal and also the UFC deal, which we'll talk about later, both have linear TV elements, which I think we both thought was a very interesting element of this. This was considered a big deal for TKO. Their stock went up. It's interesting from an ESPN standpoint.
Well, it went down and then it went up.
It went down.
It went down because initially when they announced 325 million, it was coming from 200 million. So they thought it was a 1.6 increase. Okay. And then they admitted that the previous deal wasn't worth 200 million a year. It was worth 180 million. Yeah. And then they got the 1.8 increase that they were expecting on the markets. Yeah.
Thank you. But I think the benefit of this deal more than the linear TV piece of it is how much ESPN as a network can promote the WWE stuff on their television. They have all of those little side shows like the Pat McAfee show and Around the Horn and all that interview stuff plus Sports Center and all that stuff. So you're going to see a lot more WWE content on those places and on those programs because the WWE will want to, ESPN will want to push it as part of WWE. I do think there's also possibly some negative side effects of this. But Trish, do you think this is a good deal for WWE or not?
For TKO's perspective, it's a very good deal because they got the monetary amount that they want. And that's their primary kind of concern with these things. In terms of the content, they're providing much less content to ESPN than they were to Peacock.
Yes, so they don't have to do all those specials and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's no specials, there's no programming amount of hours required, there's no NXT, there's no archive, so you don't have to have the storage space for that either. There will be separate deals, which we'll talk about in a bit. So you are literally just getting the 8 single nights, 2 double nights of WrestleMania and SummerSlam as part of your deal. The idea is that you've got something every month, so the idea is to help with churn. So that's a big thing for especially new streamers.
Yeah.
And something like ESPN where you're going to have huge seasonal sports. So you've got college football, going kind of late August through to bowl games in January.
Yep.
And then you've got the NFL, which is their massive investment because that's the one that ESPN now is going to be part owned by the NFL with that deal with NFL Red Zone and everything else being thrown in there. And then the WNBA and everything else that they have kind of access to. A lot of that's seasonal. So you're going to have NFL subscribers, for example, coming in September or maybe August, depending on preseason, and then by February they're done. So that kind of viewership could move away because you don't. It's the same way. Like if I subscribe to MLB Network for baseball, like I do, I subscribe in April.
Yep.
I end my subscription in October. That's what we do, right? So it's exactly what you do because there's no point having it during the off season. So if you have something that goes all the way through the year, then you can help to kind of eliminate churn.
Yes.
The big thing else for WWE as well is that you're right. You think they can have more kind of media in terms of ESPN. But what I found was interesting was the focus when they talk about the deal is not on kind of traditional sports viewers because they're going to capture them on ESPN anyway. Right. So for ESPN, it's like we want the people that wouldn't come to our service otherwise, which they talk about a lot about women. They talked a lot about women in terms of like that. So when you have something, so if you are not a sports viewer and you don't carry ESPN for your cable system, because the only people that are going to be entitled to the ESPN streaming service for no additional cost are the people that pay already for ESPN on their cable service, if that cable service is affiliated with it. Yeah. So if you aren't one of those people and say currently you pay for Peacock and you pay your $6.99 or you get it through your cable provider, you're now looking at a $29.99 price point for pay-per-views. And the question is will those people, and this is the people they're targeting that they think will be very useful for this new service, and it's the second time that they've been used to launch a new service, and I'm sure that's part of the reason ESPN have looked at them, that they were such a major part of the Peacock offering when that service was launched.
Yep.
But are they going to move across? Are they willing to pay that price point? Are they able to just figure out that they can just get a VPN and get it on Netflix internationally? So that's the question of how many of those people will then transfer across and become consistent viewers on that app for the WWE product for that price point, which is quite a heavy price point.
Yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah, if you're used to paying $6.99 or getting it through your provider for Peacock and the access to that. The other thing with it is how heavily will they be pushed on the app? Because it's one thing to be pushed on ESPN, but when you're chasing all these viewers from other services, and the fact that we talk about how balkanized media is now, and the reason why UFC can go to Paramount is that you follow the product rather than the product coming to you in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So it's not the same. It's not like now you can go and put someone on like a national media outlet and now everybody knows a song or everybody sees something. Everyone's going to go see a film. You think how many movies would be much more successful if everything still worked the way it did 20 years ago? It doesn't. Yep. It doesn't. So on Peacock...
Monoculture is dead.
It is, absolutely. And you can see that in so much of kind of media and arts and It's even sports to a lot of degree. You see sports that don't have that significant kind of trouble following, struggling in the most part unless they're kind of defined differently or they have a different set of attraction. They have to have an overhaul. We've seen that in the UK recently with things like darts and snooker and that sort of thing. But I'm off the point here. But it's a case of Peacock, as you said, were very heavily pushing this brand as part of their front window. How heavy are ESPN going to push it on their app as well? Especially when your main kind of concern is going to be the NFL, right? Because you've done this huge deal with the NFL. And then how much are they going to push it through the autumn when you've got college football? How much are you going to push it against the WNBA? How much are you going to push it against all these different things that you've got? You've still got the NBA going on. So it's like you then have to balance up. Are they going to lose kind of that heavy push on those apps that's going to make people remember it? Because that's what you're looking at with Netflix, right? You're not seeing this tremendous growth that we thought we might see for pay-per-views viewership on Netflix. Because they're treated exactly the same as everything else. They don't get this hard push. They're not kind of being so visual to you, and now they're not treated with any more importance. We're not seeing these kind of... I don't think we see... weekly TV is weekly TV. And I think the fact that they use John Cena and people like that on SmackDown where they can show more impact on weekly TV is quite an interesting thing when you compare it to Raw. But it's like... what we expected to see was big numbers for, the destination shows, the pay-per-views in Netflix, and we haven't seen that, and that's probably why it makes no sense for Netflix to pick it up in the US, because they're not going to add any additional subscribers to what they are, what they have currently for Raw. So it made no sense for them to actually financially to pick up the rest of the package. But it is that case of, how many people are going to kind of go to it and gravitate to it. It's not pushed at them on a consistent basis.
The other interesting piece about this is that we're in a situation where, with the exception of USA choosing to take SmackDown and let Raw go, but was essentially a renewal, but not a renewal per se, but they stayed in the WWE business. Mm-hmm. Let's put it this way. WWE have not had a repeat customer in the last couple of years in terms of who wants to keep the material that they have on their site, which is pretty interesting. Netflix either didn't want to bid for this or didn't want to pay as much as ESPN did. Peacock and NBC Universal didn't want to bid for this or didn't want to pay as much as ESPN did. It kind of, Fox obviously was a huge one where they just were pretty much out and weren't interested in anything that they weren't interested in doing SmackDown. I think that's something that kind of suggests that these companies all seem to be willing to part ways with WWE, as opposed to like going in on bidding higher for them than what they're getting from some of these other folks.
They can find value in. They basically find their level of value with WWE, don't they? So the way that this is working for WWE in this sense is that ESPN are looking to launch this new service, and they think that this helps them get into a market that they won't do with their traditional offering. Right. We'll see whether that happens or not. The counter for that is obviously the Fox deal, where they thought they would have similar things happen, and it didn't. Right. And that's also the counter for thinking that ESPN coverage, additional ESPN coverage, is going to help the profile of WWE significantly because they were all over Fox, NFL,
their
and
NFL
Fox.
Broadcasts.
And you're on linear, much more access to everyone and globally. And they didn't grow. Globally, sorry, in the US, and we didn't see it. We didn't see that as the driver, In fact, you could probably look at Peacock as a bigger driver in terms of movement in WWE, in terms of their way they built, than you can look at TV numbers. So it's one of those things where they have a defined kind of level, and they obviously don't see a way that they can grow from that. That's what I would look at with that. Is, are they looking at something that they think can grow in value, or is worth that amount? And that's been consistent. So even like USA, they stayed in the WWE game, but they dropped NXT. Yep. And they did drop Raw for what was a cheaper alternative, essentially, in SmackDown. And they thought that will fulfill what we need it to do at the price point that we want. And, it's one of those things, WWE have kind of fallen upwards, so it's kind of confusing in a way. Yeah, it's confusing in a way in terms of you've got all these people that they have worked with previously who are like, you're not of as enough value for us, but they still have managed to fall upwards, whether it's because of these new services starting or, whatever else. So.
We'll see what happens with this. I think it's interesting. like you said, I do agree with you about the counter programming point where people are like, oh my God, it's going to be fantastic for WWE. They're going to be on all this NFL programming, which is like they were already, like, and it didn't do anything for them. But maybe, you never know. People would be really excited about all these older part-timers coming back, and that'll be a big drive for them. We also had TKO with another big renewal contract media rights discussion where UFC's media rights were also up this year. And again, a lot of folks expected them to potentially switch to Netflix, possibly move to stay on ESPN. There was a lot of discussion. One of the challenging factors has been ESPN's rights with UFC for the last couple of years have included pay-per-view programs on their ESPN app, as well as live Saturday night shows for ESPN's linear television. The pay-per-views in the last couple of months have not been doing well. I think the discussion was that WWE got less of a payment from UFC because the pay-per-views didn't hit a certain number.
TKO.
Threshold.
They didn't get
TKO. Jesus Christ, I'm going to mix these up.
They did get less of a payment in the previous quarter because the pay-per-view rate wasn't high enough to trigger the next one. Yeah.
So this one is a little bit interesting because it involves U.S. politics, which is so fun to discuss these days. Essentially, UFC was bought. Their pay-per-view rights were bought by Paramount Plus. Okay, Paramount Plus is a streaming service / media company that also owns CBS. CBS Paramount is the company. CBS Paramount's been in the news lately because they merged with a company called Skydance to form a much larger media conglomerate. This merger had to be approved by the U.S. government. Donald Trump was pissed off at CBS for various things, including a 60 Minutes coverage of him that he didn't like. Stephen Colbert's show in the United States airs on CBS. And he certainly has skewered Donald Trump repeatedly. So the approval for this merger went through. CBS canceled the Colbert show, which many people were quick to say had nothing to do with politics. It was because of ratings and the cost of these shows, which feels like a level of bullshit. And then all of a sudden, Paramount Plus, out of nowhere, bids a giant, huge amount of money for the UFC, which is, obviously something that Donald Trump loves to appear at UFC shows. He's there all the fucking time. And maybe a deal that was not quite expected. There was news that came out this week that the deal with Paramount Plus was a very last-minute deal, that they were prepared to renew with ESPN for a smaller dollar value. Was it $900 million?
It would have been combined under $900 million for... $900
million.
The two pack, well, yeah. So it would have been under $900 million for the two packages, even though they split the fight nights and the pay-per-views. Yeah.
Right. But they ended up with Paramount Plus getting $1.1 billion a year. Now, this includes their weekly television programs as well as the pay-per-views. The pay-per-views are not going to be pay-per-views. They will just be, as I think they're referring to them as numbered shows.
Yep.
So the numbered shows will appear on Paramount and on CBS potentially, although they haven't ironed out, that seemed to be some level of confusion between Mark Shapiro and Dana White as to whether that was going to happen. Mark Shapiro did a media press push where he talked about how pay-per-view is dead. Traditional pay-per-view is dead. Nobody's using it anymore. Dana White, meanwhile, is still attempting to sell pay-per-views through USC because the remaining deal that they have the rest of the year with UFC and ESPN. So that was a fun time. So there's a lot going on with this. There's no more pay-per-view points. The whole thing is just, they got a fucking shit ton of money for this, which seems weird and counterintuitive considering that they, we talked about, hadn't been making as much money on these. And a lot of the complaints lately has been that the pay-per-view cards are not as good as they used to be because the fighters are not what they once were. Trish, talk to me about this deal. What are your thoughts?
See, as much as the fights and the cards aren't what they once were, at the end of the day, this is a content farm now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Most of these places are.
Yeah.
This is something we have to adjust to, and it's a struggle. And the idea, again, is Paramount want to really expand their brand. They are spending big money at the end of this merger. Heard a little bit this week about some of the advertising money they're spending, and it's insane. And it's very much a case of they think this can be a significant thing. 1.1 billion, I don't know, it sounds crazy on paper. And then you think, well, you're losing how much pay-per-view money a year? Yeah. How much does that add up to put all these things in one place and then put them just behind a normal paywall? And it will mean that their price will evidently rise. Of course, it's going to rise when they go on there. But this is a product, again, that will help to prevent from churn because it's going to go all year round. They have that option now where they don't need to really stack their cards. They don't need to think about that so much. Yep, they drop the pay-per-view points, which also gives you your labour issues. So there is no leverage now for the fighters in that way. So you've got even less and less leverage. So the cost of what they're going to pay fighters is going to get lessened. You know, they don't need to pay huge, big things so much now in that regard in the way that they once did. And that's probably what WWE want as well. And that's why a lot of WWE wrestlers should be very happy that AEW exists, because otherwise their leverage would be very much lessened with the current situation too. So that's kind of what's happening there. And that'll be the same with the boxing thing they're picking up. They picked the TKO boxing thing up with Saudi Arabia. And that'll be very much a similar pay structure as well. So that's something where this transition over into these kind of streaming giants for this content and the loss in value essentially in content individually for an overall amount is going to be damaging to the actual people that work for these companies that, you know, make them their 1.1 billion a year with Paramount in the first place. But it's one of those as well where you can see now that the willingness to put this all in one place is what Dana White said was kind of key for them. But it's also that case of they didn't feel like they need to be on ESPN. They feel they're an established enough brand now that they can run on Paramount and their fans will travel to them. And that's essentially what you're selling to that streamer. And this is what we're looking at now when we talk about how media is all split up, is that, you know, it's not the same game anymore. So you don't need to be on ESPN. That's how they see it. They can be on Paramount. We'll see how this works out successfully for them and for Paramount. You know, for them financially, again, you know, the TKO is very much in, we must deliver the rate that we are expected to deliver.
Yes.
And if that means that we take to a platform that's maybe not as accessible or acknowledged as others, then so be it. And then we take our fans with us because it's about how they invest in that product and how you bring them with you rather than showcasing them to so many other people. That kind of line of thinking is dead. So this is, financially a very good deal for them. How it works out in kind of practice for especially the fighters doesn't look too kind of promising. And for the fans, you know, you the level of content that you are going to be provided with, and we're seeing this across the board. It's not just, you know, UFC and WWE as well, and you know, we see all across the board. The more content there is, the lesser the kind of quality, and that's where if you are going to remain on pay-per-view, like an AEW, you need to keep that level of quality up to make that kind of worthwhile. And if you're able to do so, you can still be successful in that field. But as soon as you drop that, then you drop that level of quality, then you will lose kind of the interest in paying for that sort of price because of all these services now that are all encompassing.
Right. Well, that's where essentially one of the things that got talked about was the fact that WWE and UFC kind of not switched places, but UFC has now gone to all of our pay-per-views are free if you have Paramount Plus, and TKO went, you have to now pay an extra amount of money per month in order to access our pay-per-views, unless you already have a cable subscription, and this particular one is on TV this month. But it leads to that interesting question of, from a WWE perspective, are people who've been used to paying nothing or having the WWE stuff included as part of streaming packages that they already have, are the non-sports fans going to be willing to pay extra for pay-per-views like, you know, I mean, certainly I think you could say Royal Rumble and WrestleMania, absolutely, but some of the smaller pay-per-views, like Elimination Chamber or, you know, Bad Blood or some of these other ones, like, you know, is the quality of these 5-match pay-per-views that they've been putting on with 2 hours of commercials going to be enough to cause people to say, oh my God, I have to pay $30 a month for ESPN 2 or whatever they're going to do. I think that's the piece that you kind of question, like, are they going to have to then change the approach that they've had up to now for pay-per-views? You know, it's kind of interesting. And again, I don't know.
I mean, they're only going to show the first couple hours on whichever, ESPN affiliated channel if they do that. I think that's what Mark Shapiro's have finally come out with. But in terms of whether they'll pay for him or not, you can look at it both ways and say that, it did generate people to go towards Peacock, right?
Yes.
So you can look at people and go that way. You can also look at it in the fact that since Raw's moved to Netflix, SmackDown's held up pretty well where it is because people have chosen not to go across. So it's probably helped SmackDown to stay in a stronger position. And they obviously see that because that's why they're using their big rating mover in this year in John Cena on SmackDown, since they stopped the time switches for Raw back in March. So it's like it works both ways. We won't know. And then if you're a younger audience especially, you just VPN and you can put it on Netflix. Netflix aren't going to shut you down for that. So how many of those people, and especially the young female audience, which is very much what they were talking about in their interviews as target points, how many of them are going to look at it, or how many are just go, I can pay, VPN $8, then I've got all the shows on Netflix as I have currently. So it's a lot of challenges involved in that, and it's how they're going to tackle them challenges. But for them, it doesn't really, they're not so interested in that. That's for the streamer to kind of pursue, because for them it's just about how much money they're receiving for that and providing them with that content.
It's very interesting. It's going to be a different way of viewing some of this stuff. I'm curious how it's going to go, but I guess we're just going to have to wait and see, right?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
From a flip side of business, we have the curious case of total nonstop action wrestling. So TNA has been the topic of a lot of conversation this week. And I don't know if they're not strategically placed media links, or leaks, I should say. So July 17th, the TNA president, Carlos Silva, fascinating man, Hat Man. He wears a hat with a TNA logo that doesn't seem to exist. But he did an interview with Sports Illustrated's The Takedown, John Alba, where he talked about getting a TV deal for TNA that would be worth $10 million a year. This was a number he floated. This was the same interview where he said that WWE and Nick Khan and Triple H were using WWE's marketplace power to lift their arms up and bring up the whole industry, which I thought was also very fucking funny. But also worth noting that this particular press push on the 17th of July seemed to be built around WWE doing a press push that week. That was the week before All In, to kind of minimize the effect of All In, and again to put TNA and AEW kind of on the same level, right? That TNA is going to get this money deal that people are going to pay for them to be on. They're going to give them a money deal for them to be paid to be on cable TV or a streamer of something, whatever. So Silva headed back to the Takedown on Wednesday, August 13th, with an exclusive major update, and now he's saying that the deal could be for $7 to $10 million a year, and he's optimistic that a deal can be reached by October. And then the next day, which was Thursday, the 14th, we had another exclusive John Alba report with the headline, TNA open to moving and opposing AEW as part of their media rights discussions. And there was a bunch of stuff in the article, but the big quote was, multiple independent sources tell the Takedown on SI that there have been at least discussions of TNA moving to a WWE-associated network, and that the company is even open to shifting from Thursday to Wednesday nights to go head-to-head with AEW Dynamite. While it was not directly indicated that the destination would be the CW, it was expressed to the Takedown on SI that the CW's interest in the promotion is legitimate, and that some WWE stakeholders would like TNA to be part of the network. That was Thursday. So then later on Thursday night, there started to be a lot of rumors on the internet about Lorenzo Furtada, who was going to buy TNA, right? This was something that was circulating, and there was some discussions about it. Lorenzo Furtada being the person who used to own UFC, sold it. I think he's currently worth, $3 billion or some other stuff like that. And then finally we had Dave Meltzer on Friday on The Observer coming up with it, basically saying, yes, there's been some discussions about this. It's not a done deal, but there are conversations about Lorenzo buying TNA. And he also dropped some other interesting information, which is that WWE has a buyout clause in their agreement with TNA. So they have a partnership agreement with TNA right now, which is how they share talent and stuff like that. And they have this buyout clause with all the promotions that they work with. They have an option for a certain period of time to buy TNA, and they also have the right of first refusal to match any other offers for TNA, which eventually means that for a period of time, they kind of have the ability to approve any buyer for TNA. And Meltzer reported that they want a WWE-friendly person to make the deal because they want TNA to be the number two spot in the U.S., and they will help to get them there to sort of get rid of AEW. And Meltzer reported that they want an owner at the Khan's financial level, right? So this has been something that's, I know, it's very funny. This has been something that's come up a lot, and it's something that certain folks have talked about in terms of how WWE views AEW. One of the things that seems to irritate the fuck out of the people at WWE is that Tony Khan and his father have a lot of money, and that they can afford to withstand financial losses if AEW doesn't do well because they have so much money that it doesn't matter. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that AEW is a profitable company as far as we know right now because they have a $185 million TV deal, which, it would probably make up for any years that they were not profitable before that TV deal came to place. This is essentially Tony Khan's entire business strategy. He's talked about it repeatedly as part of why he started AEW, because he felt that TV money was out there and was something he could do something with. So we basically have another instance in which WWE is doing everything they can to try and compete with AEW, in this case by using another promotion not associated with them, effectively as a puppet to try and minimize and talk. Like, if you take TNA and say, well, TNA is AEW's equivalent. TNA is, AEW's competed with TNA and WWE. It makes AEW look less. It makes them look small time, as opposed to pointing out that AEW is probably, this is the thing that Dave Meltzer has been on for the last few weeks. He believes that AEW Dynamite is probably between Max and cable hitting about the same live numbers as Raw is on Netflix. And it's caused a lot of people to lose their minds at Dave. I'm not sure if I feel comfortable pointing out that these numbers. I do think there's also there's the heady rumor discussion point that's been going around that it's certainly possible that part of the reason why WWE has been going so hard at AEW recently, which is a change in their strategy, which I'm sure we're going to touch on, is possibly because Nick Khan is aware of how well, if this is true, that AEW is doing for HBO Max, and that they might be pulling numbers stronger than Netflix is. So a lot of this is up for discussion. It's hard to imagine that this is a good thing for TNA. I can't see that if I owned a company, I'd be willing to let it be used in this way. But, Carlos Silva seems very happy to be shown on television handing out TNA belts to NXT wrestlers. I don't know. Trish, what did you think of all this? Is it a major problem for AEW with TNA getting a major buyer of the equivalent financial level of Shad and Tony Khan?
You can have a buyer of any level. It just depends what they're willing to spend and how willing they're getting to be in the marketplace. And being that, WWE having first refusal and the option to buy TNA is probably not a surprise to anybody that's watched how they especially acted in the UK back with the independents there, because every promotion they worked with there, they had the option to buy. It was well known at the time. I think our friend Harrison, who's very clued in on TNA, mentioned it at the start of this relationship as well, that it wouldn't be a surprise, and it's not. So here's the thing. So even if you had a big money buyer, what would they then be able to offer TNA that would make them competitive with AEW? Is it going to be talent contracts? Okay, if you increase the price of talent contracts, are you not inflicting that on WWE as well?
Right.
So then what is it that you can give them? What is it that would make any difference? If you go on to something like the CW and you go on a Wednesday, how is that kind of look to the CW network, where you can go on Thursdays, potentially, depending what happens with Collision, and you could have a much more freer run, and you're going to get much more value out of that product if you pay between $7 million, $10 million on there on a Thursday than you are going head to head. Because as much as they want to damage AEW, from a network perspective, does that matter to them? It was all right for USA because they could have the content, 2 hours of NXT basically for free.
Yes. Yes.
Essentially, when they started,
and when they had to pay for it, they chose not to, as we just talked about. They didn't offer big money for NXT.
No, they gave them a reasonable increase, but it wasn't. We're not talking massive amounts here. And then it was like, no, we don't want this. So, and you are not going to do NXT numbers with TNA. And you can chuck every WWE person under the sun onto that. But then all you do is you weaken your overall offering by doing that, because you're extending your level of content. So it sounds good on paper because, you are looking at trying to put them on the same level as AEW. So you're trying to say, you got all the media outlets there, all their Pravda out there already going, this could be the number 2 company. And it's like, feasibly, if they were to throw everything at it, could it, compete? Potentially. But they're not going to, because at the end of the day, for WWE, the priority is WWE, right? The same that we saw with NXT was when they put NXT head-to-head, and they had like a little bit of success at first, and then when it fell away, they stripped it down to the bare bones and moved it away.
Right.
Because it was, but the idea of this is to have like a satellite, right? So you put that up against it, and if it fails, fuck them, we don't care about them.
Yeah.
Like, whatever happens to that company, happens to that company, and that company, it's survived, it'll be fine. Well, you don't know. So the idea is to have a satellite far away that you can compete with AEW and try and damage them in any way you can to lower their kind of worth going into their next kind of broadcast, TV deal, whatever, negotiations. But also it not be you to damage your product. But the idea of bringing TNA up to that level and then putting them on a network head-to-head and is no benefit to that network. And this is a network you've just got a newer relationship with. It's not someone like USA, but you've had how many decades of relationship with as well. So how much WWE money is going to be involved there? What is the deal actually going to be? I think there would all be big questions if that deal was made. But then they're also doing things the other way as well. So you're trying to put them at the same level of TNA, but you're also counter-programming now with your main roster.
Yeah, because you couldn't do anything with NXT. NXT was clearly getting killed by AEW pay-per-views. Like, that didn't do anything. And Saturday Night Main Event went down. We saw that, so...
Yeah, and so you're now using your main roster, and you've got a window to do that, because whatever happens to these PLEs till the end of the year doesn't matter now, because you've signed the ESPN deal that will likely kick in with WrestleMania next year. So it doesn't matter to them whatever happens to those shows. So if you think you can use them to impact damage, and I do think they can impact slightly on it, but I think there's another precursor that we'll talk about in a minute. But if you are going to put TNA on there, what happens to the rest of your negotiations as well? Because you need to find a home now for NXT PLEs, which you don't currently have a home for in the US.
Yes.
In 2026. You need to potentially find a home for your archive, but that might be less important. It might be just shoved on YouTube. You also now got to find a home for AAA, who you do own at current. And, you're shipping it out. And I was kind of stunned. I was watching Triple Mania this morning, and, I've watched AAA for, God, I don't even know how long. And it's kind of really sad to watch it so sanitized. It's just a WWE product, but it's their product. You can absolutely see it's their product. So now they have to ship that product first, and that should take priority surely over TNA, because they own it and that's what they want. So you're flooding the market with all this content of your own, and then you're going to have this other partner that you want to kind of put in there as well. And it's like, where is that limit on that? Is it because there's only so much you can do with that, and there's only so many times you can have people come down and do appearances where it actually has any value, and we've seen that consistently. We saw that with NXT the first time, that you can do that for so long and then it just loses its value. At the end of the day, it needs to be a strong product. It needs to have that kind of consistent attraction. And would TNA have that, especially when a lot of the TNA names that we're looking at towards the end of this year are all up for contracts, and people that potentially WWE are looking at. Joe Hendry is not staying in TNA, No. Mike Santana is probably not staying in TNA.
Yeah, they're going to take anybody who's worth anything, because they can actually pay them $7 to $10 million a year for this deal. Potentially, it's not a lot of money for a touring TV show. I also think it's worthwhile from the perspective of carefully reading these articles. Is that the quote is that multiple independent sources say there have been discussions of TNA moving to a WWE associated network. Not that there is a WWE associated network that wants these guys or is willing to pay them. There's been talk about it.
There probably have been discussions. I think there's a lot of people in AEW who believe there's been discussions. They believe they're absolutely aiming to put them on.
I'm sure they are.
Opposite AEW, and of course they are. But it's like, there's a reality element to it. And if you did it, there's a part of me that would kind of relish in it slightly from an AEW perspective, because it would force them to not be able to punch shows in the way that they sometimes can. Because when we used to have the NXT shows head to head, there'd always have to be a strong main event. There'd always have to be something strong top of the top of the hour. There'd have to be a strong open. You'd have to have, some of the best talent that you have on your roster wrestling or out there in front of the crowd on a regular basis. And some of that has been lost, pretty quickly when you look back at what happened in 2021 after NXT moved, especially look at May, and you'll see a very quick difference. And especially once you get into when they had the big signings, and the quality of TV kind of dropped a little bit. Well, did drop from there. So it's one of them things where it would challenge AEW in a way. But it is what we were kind of expecting to see going into this winter, that they would step up their attacks, because we've heard it. We've heard it through the rest of the year, that there's things that they've hated, that they can see that there's a kind of a shift in terms of how these products are viewed, yes, and some of the momentum. And they want to cut that off. They don't want them to keep gaining momentum. We knew they were going to target Paige. We spoke about it last week. It wasn't like just going to throw it out there. It's because they speak about him a lot. They didn't like Double or Nothing getting all the attention it got. They didn't like the Build to All In getting the attention it got. They didn't like getting, all their counter programming for All In failing. They didn't like the impact that they had in Mexico. They don't like all these things. So they're going to target it because they don't want it catching any more momentum, especially when you're going to lose John Cena in like 3 months. And I do think there's a big number difference coming when we see that. I absolutely do, because I look at the live event numbers and the difference between numbers with Cena and without, and I can see it, and I think they can probably see that as well. So they want to cut that off, and they'll use TNA to get that. And I think when Carlos Silva's spoken about, TNA not being profitable, and you have to wonder how long, what's going on with Anthem, how to, and their kind of role with Access TV is what's going on with that deal there, that's meaning that they're so willing to kind of fall into the hands of WWE.
Yeah.
And that's probably the big question, because when you look at like their offering, it's essentially a cross between a retirement home and people kind of coming in through the indies. And it's like, okay, so what can you turn that into? What can you turn that into that's any different from another WWE product? Because essentially you'd be looked at, what would you be, like the 4th TV show in WWE? Or 5th? Are you the same with Evolve? Like what level are you on there? So it's like, you take that away, that branding, you become that. Does that affect you? Do you gain from that, or do you lose from that? Because you're not TNA anymore. That TNA identity, and I know people laugh about the word TNA identity, considering the last 20 years, but I think people still see them as their own product at this point.
Yes. And
you would be taking that away completely. And having just watched what they've just done with AAA, and, it's hard because you see a crowd, you've got 19,000 in CDMX, and you can see that, but you think that's not AAA anymore. And that's not to say AAA is traditional Lucha Libre, because it's not. But when I'm watching a main event and it's like, WWE camera shots, WWE ring, WWE referee, the way the match is constructed is completely WWE. What is enough kind of different in your product that's going to make people watch this as a 4th brand, and especially opposed to AEW, on that night, that's going to do enough damage to them to make this all worthwhile? And I don't blame TNA at all for thinking, if they think this is their best option, but you should learn from everyone else around you as well, and especially when you look what happened to a lot of the European promotions and how those kind of relationships stopped because they put them on the network and then it had no effect. Yeah. And they do it without. They counter-program. They'll stick TNA pay-per-views on YouTube to counter-program Dynamites and that sort of thing. And all the time while you're doing this, you're taking value out of the TNA Plus product and all the subscription service and everything else.
Yep.
So you're doing it in order to chase this deal, but it's very much reliant on, you must get this deal now, Mr. Silver, Mr. Hatman, you need to get this deal. If you don't get this deal, then you're in big trouble. And then you go from there, and then you've got all the issues with talent, retention and everything else coming up towards the end of the year as well. So that's probably why they're pushing, looking at this October thing. And they know, if you're going to impact on AEW, the biggest time that you can have an impact is the winter. It's the most competitive time. It's the time where they traditionally start on ratings. Last year was a disaster. Ratings, pay-per-view, live, everything. So that's where they think they can have the biggest impact. But I also think that I don't understand the strategy of trying to put them in there as well, and then trying to use your main roster talent and your PLEs to do the same thing for WWE. Because the other time you're telling the AEW is at that level, and that has the big ability to backfire with this all-out show, and with whatever they do with World's End with the Cena retirement. The fact that they are looking at potentially putting the retirement of John Cena against a standard AEW pay-per-view
is fucking mental.
It's crazy, and it literally says, like, you're putting them on the same level. So you're doing the opposite. You've got two strategies here, and it's like, oh, you got to pick one, So you're trying to say we're on TNA level, but you're going to put them on the same level of John Cena's retirement because Goldberg's retirement failed against Moxley and Adam Page. Like that's crazy. So I don't understand that difference in that, because there's a very much a case that as much as I have the frustration over the fact that conversation's already moved on to the counter-programming that we spoke about earlier with Lesnar and Cena, you're then putting up whatever against that and moving that up to the same level. So you're giving them a boost right at this time where you're trying to put another promotion in against them. You're setting up TNA to fail for me in that aspect if you were to do that. You know, if they were to start a deal in October and you're giving AEW all this attention, then I don't understand how that kind of lives in the same ecosystem. And yeah, it just confuses me greatly, because this is the biggest kind of attempt they've had at the top to try and bury them, but also it's the biggest attention they've given them at the top as well.
Well, that's the weird part about this, and you know, I don't want to say that their strategy has changed, because WWE has never forgotten about AEW and has never stopped attempting to kind of bury them where they can, but it does seem like they've picked things up in a way that is, you know, as you said, they want to destroy the momentum, and you can kind of see the momentum changing, but it's also really weird because it's just totally different for them. Like, it's hard to imagine that, like, 2 years ago, they would have done something like put Cena's retirement as a counter program, right? Try to change the date, move the date, because this is what's been coming up this week. Has been discussions that supposedly Cena's retirement match was set for December 13th, which is like the only Saturday night in December that there's no college football, no football, and it's a clear night, and the event's going to be in Boston. And now all of a sudden is the discussion that WWE wants to change that and move that to the 27th so that they can counter-program World's End. And despite the fact that NBC has a football game exclusively on Peacock that night, as opposed to being on TV. So, like, this is just, like you said, really fucking weird. Like, why would you blow this as opposed to, like, you know, we've talked about this, both promotions have been more successful when they've sort of put their heads down and focused their own booking around their own shows as opposed to counter-programming. We saw this happen with AEW, we saw it happen a little bit with WWE. Again, I'm not trying to claim that they ever forgot AEW existed, but it certainly wasn't something that seemed to be the way they were pushing their booking. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, we're gonna do a fast turnaround on this Lesnar stuff so that we can counter-program all out, and now we're gonna do we're going to change this night to a possibly worse night for our broadcast partner just to try and screw it. And as you said, it's less of a big deal because they're leaving this deal is over with, but it's still fucking weird.
Well, the Saturday night's main event deal is part of the USA deal, is it not?
Right.
So it's still it's still ongoing. It's part of the SmackDown deal. I'm sure
that's right. It is Saturday main event.
Yeah, so
that's right.
So there's no logic to this whatsoever in terms of your broadcast partner. And then obviously we've seen them. How did they respond to? It's a good question that no one's really answered. Is how did they respond to All In? You know, that date being used there and the ratings dropping so hugely from the Cena show in May. So it's a question whether how long do you want to tolerate that for if you're NBC. So it's a strange difference. I think the biggest thing for AEW is that I think that in the short term it actually kind of give them a boost because it would that competition would probably help the attention sort of thing. But it would also mean that they would have to load their cards, and that would actually help live ticketing massively. Yeah. Because we talk about the lack of advertisement for cards being a big issue, the mystery vortex element of not knowing who's going to be there, the crazy levels of up and down pricing that's just driving me insane every time I look at anything that they're ticketing or something. Yeah. But it's like all those elements would have to be challenged because you've got this direct challenger. But the biggest thing for AEW going into this winter period and this head-to-head thing is just not shoot yourself in the foot, right?
No.
So if you look at All In, one of the big beneficiaries in terms of the way that was covered and the way that the fans felt about the product and that kind of thing was WWE were the bad guys. You know, they were doing the counter program, that sort of thing. But also, they were really, really invested in the top line of what was going on that product, right?
Yes.
So they were really, really invested in that show. It was like, we had like 4 or 5 matches deep where people were like, I really want to see this match. I really want to see that match. I'm really invested in this. This is the right thing in the right spots, right? Yes. So you have to be really, really careful that when you look at that all-out card, and you have to think about this. And I think it's harder because you're going into a residency period, right? So right after Forbidden Door, you've got 3 weeks in Philadelphia in a 900-seat building. Then you've got 1 week in London and Ontario. And that's it. So you've got a really short turnaround from this big show into that one, which means some of these things probably need to bleed through. And you need to make sure you put the right things at the top. You know, I think it's quite obvious. I know that Max is wrestling Mystico the night before. And title versus Mask, wuss. Where's your hair? I know you want to go back to Turkey, but yeah, come on, like...
Yeah, put
Mask
your fucking
versus,
hair up, dude. Come
put
on.
your fucking hair up. Mask versus
Nobody
title.
cares about the fucking title in Mexico.
Yeah, like... God. Just couldn't do it.
Nope.
Just go bold. You can live with yourself. You got to get some more implants. It'll work.
Do the Lex Luthor thing for real.
Yeah, like, you make it part of your character change. But I know he's doing that the night before. But I do think that the Page MJF thing needs to continue into that cycle. Because that cycle's so short, right? So you could do like a TV match. If you want to do Briscoe and Page on TV and then have him come back and attack after Forbidden Door, you can do that. And you go into some sort of stip match for there.
Yeah.
Because when you look at it, it's like, one, they snooker themselves anyway, because you're putting a lights out cage match as the main event, this one. So Page has to main event the next one, right? Because they've never had a champion open with, 2 semi-main events. And the biggest worry about him, and it's that same thing. So he has to get up and do it again tomorrow, which is mad how much attention that's fucking got. Fucking hell.
No, because it was good.
It's crazy, but no, just crazy. Thank you to Wooster for the incredible video as well. Like, the fact people do shit with our content is just amazing to me. It just stunts me. Anyway, I'm distracted. But
back to the topic.
Back to the topic. But they also have to do the right things with him, right? You have to keep that focus on him consistently. Because the biggest worry about him, and I see it all the time when it's like, oh, Tony could be Booker of the Year, and you could argue against that with Stardom and CML, but it's like, you can't allow him to be secondary, right? So he needs to have a top program, and he needs to now main event that show. And you need to main event with some of your kind of homemade, homegrown people in general, to be honest, because you're going up against this recycled old event, nostalgia match in WWE.
Yep.
Just like when I hear the suggestions, we should put FTR and Cope and Christian at the top. And I'm like, okay, so we're going to reward like the worst program in AEW this year, potentially, like long form program by far, some of the worst work we've ever seen on TV on a regular basis. And two, it's like, and then it's like, we've had a tag match at the top, and that also went above the world title where Paige was in the match, so let's maybe not do that. And then secondly, like, you think that's going to sell pay-per-views at that level? I'm sorry, it's not. Right? But then we're also going to put, like, the idea of putting
They didn't watch it on TV. They're not going to fucking watch it.
Yeah, the biggest thing driving, we know the biggest thing since, All In, the biggest guys, it's the same people that were the biggest guys at the start of the year. It's Max and Paige, right? So you continue that on, and I think that's the perfect thing to put at the very top, right? Because it's your 2 top homemade guys. I know Max used homegrown. People don't like that word because, he came from LW, Paige came from New Japan, whatever. But they are the 2 biggest homemade stars you've got. That is exactly what you should put up against this fucking nostalgia shit on the other side. Absolutely, that should be the one. So what you want to do, though, and most importantly, this is what I'm getting at, is that you want the discussion going into All Out to leave, like, the WWE sources having to talk about, this show versus this show, right? And weighing it up. What you don't want is your own fan base kind of at war because you're making decisions that, like, you're shooting yourself in the foot and being like, why the fuck are you doing this? Like, why are you doing this to this person? Because in the end of the day, like, they're not going to care. A lot of the AEW fan base are going to watch your show, but they're going to be much more invested in it if you give them something that they really want, if they're not having to question your own booking like that.
Right.
Then you can play on the tribal thing, and you can use all that, and and you probably should. I don't think you don't need to be stupid with it, but you need to emphasise your own product and have everyone invested in that to go against these things. You need to be on your best foot forward, and that's what they were at All In. They were absolutely on their best foot forward. Same at Double or Nothing as well. Best foot forward. And people felt that, and that's why they went with the AEW shows and, didn't even think so much about the WWE shows. So it's the same thing again. You need to be best foot forward, have your best people at the top, and not fall into the trap of kind of nostalgia versus nostalgia. Because at the end of the day, what you're saying is, this is our alternative, this is our product, this is AEW. What do you want AEW to be? What do you want AEW to look like when the focus lens is, again, going to be on your product?
I think that you're 100% right, and I think all you have to do is look at both the ratings and the stuff that people are really enthused and excited about. I don't know that there's that much excitement about this extremely accelerated.
It's so funny. Oh my God.
So fucking bad. It's so fucking bad. Like, who's doing this? Like, it sucks. Like, it sucks if you're like You're going into the freaking audience and asking the audience questions. You're doing a fucking DQ with Stokely. Like,
We're
all of
talking
this
about
is
Hoes on AEW television in
hose
2025.
on AEW television. Again,
God, the fuck, man.
Come on, stop it. Do it better.
Warren Hayes had a
fucking
point
better.
that Copeland is exactly what people say Chris Jericho is in AEW, and he's right. I was
Don't disagree with that.
could you imagine, like, oh my god. Anyway, but yeah,
Whatever.
I think the idea is crazy in that regard, because I think you just need to emphasize everything about your product, and it needs to be, your top people at the top of that card, and this is AEW, and that's what they've done so well at this year. And I do think we always go back to the same things where Tony needs to speak less and the talent needs to speak more, but it's a case of getting the brand out there in this positive image. And that's the way that you do that, and continue your momentum that you are building, especially for your pay-per-views. Going upwards, and then obviously they're going to have a full house at Forbidden Door next week. They're going to have a really good sized TV taping up at the Hydro in Glasgow, which I think I'm just going to check my shifts tonight if I can get that one off. If it is off, if I'm allocated it, then I will probably try and head up for the day, because that would be pretty cool. It's a great venue, so that's why I'm kind of less liking the idea of the residencies now. I think that there's definitely an element where there's lots of talk about the TV tapings, right? But when you look at what they did in Roanoke,
yeah,
and the pricing structure and how they got that right, I don't see why we need to go into 900 seat buildings. I get the loading cost, I get all that, but I think 1 week in one of these things is great. But when you see repeated weeks and then you see them come out, and this is what I kept getting from TV last week, is when you see them come out into like bigger arenas and then the smaller ones, it is really, really jarring. And I think that is something that they need to think about more going forward in terms of, and I know it's a big deal at the moment, because you're thinking about how do you produce TV the most cost effectively, being that your market and the way that you've built your structure is that pay-per-views are your big attendance kind of drivers. So you've got to think about how do you do that, but without kind of making your TV look minimal. And especially if you were going to get the kind of challenge of another brand, whether how little or big impact that has is a different question. But you don't want to be in the position that NXT were in back in 2019, where your brand looks smaller. And that's the risk. And obviously, you look at residencies, and now I think, you've got to build to this all-out show, and 3 of these weeks are in this tiny venue. So it's like that's where things have got to continue on. And that's the sort of thing. What did you think of in terms of the main event for Forbidden Door, the Lights Out Steel Cage? What did you think of that announcement in terms of how it was built before then going up to there? Because it was real crazy in terms of how out of the blue that one was.
Weird. This is one of those ones where I struggle to have my, knowledge of things going on backstage with my view of the stuff happening on screen. Like, everybody in that match is hurt, and it's hard not to look at it and say, okay, this is the best way. Again, any kind of plunder match or, match with the Young Bucks, and Moxley's also a genius at this stuff. Like, they're going to be able to protect people. They're going to be able to keep an eye on folks. They're going to be able to give people opportunity to not have to push themselves or deal with injury. You had to have Ospreay in this match. You had to have Tanahashi in this match, like, coming off the G1. So I think it makes more sense for me. It was so arbitrary and weird. But, like, I'm not sure there was any other way around it. I'm not... I think the stuff that was the weirdest was the Omega and Ibushi piece of it. That just was weird. Really strange.
This Kenny thing is just a continuous strange thing this year. I tell you, we keep saving it. When we get to the end of the year, we're going to do a Roman Kenny comparison for their years.
Because I
think it's fascinating. And not always in a good way. But the idea that Kenny Omega is just thrown up in a graphic, as much as that team is, it's an incredible team and that sort of thing, but it's just bizarre. It's fucking bizarre. And like, I mean, there's whole elements of this that are kind of, there's some elements come since, All In that have been a little bit clunky, right? We've seen, and some of that have been like injury inflicted. We've seen that.
Yes.
And, they're going to have continued issues after Forbidden Door with that as well, absences and that sort of thing. We know there's other stuff that's going to happen there. So it's like, unfortunately, so that's something they're kind of battling. But it's been like really, really clunky in terms of putting stuff together. And it's not just the awful fucking Adam Copeland nonsense. and the worst Christian promo you've ever seen in your fucking life. It's like, sorry, but you've also got this element where you are setting up kind of Darby and Moxley, and then you've thrown the impetus off of Darby now, after you've kind of had to, because you had to like be careful with when they continue the Page thing, but I think they did a decent enough job of transitioning that, right?
I agree. I agree with that. I think they sort of got him out of that and onto the Darby stuff in a decent way. It made sense from a character standpoint for me.
Yeah, and now you're cooling that back off again to now put the focus this week especially on Will and Jon Moxley, because you're doing this cage match, right? So Darby, it's funny because they have Darby at the front of the graphic, but it's very clear that he's not at the front of the program right now.
Right.
So as much as they did like, oh, you can think they did Collision promo back in December, it's like, but you've kind of had Will gazump him, and then you've got to then, so then when you get this and you look at it and you think, okay, the faces have to win this match, right? They have to win.
Yes.
You look at it because when it's in London, you're doing the Ospreay thing. Tanahashi's retirement, last match in the UK, yeah. So you're like, so then what? So you are just, in a way, it's becoming much, much harder it's going to have much harder for Darby to kind of come back in. I'm not saying he can't do that, but it's weird to then take that focus off him again in this secondary program, to then put it on to Will for this period of time. It doesn't help him in his stand-in. No. So, in fact, it's probably, I don't know if it's more damaging than kind of, or less. You know, people argue it was damaging that he wasn't the guy who took, you know, the belt from Moxley. But then you could get away with it doing a secondary program, but you're actually now putting in like third in line. So I find that was kind of interesting. The way that it's constructed it was just completely out of nowhere. You know, last week it's like, oh, Darby, Mox, Forbidden Door, and then it's like, okay, no, we're not doing that, we're doing this. And it was a way of getting it. They wanted the main event, I get it. You know, you've got enough crossover lines between everybody that you can justify everything. I think then you should explore that more. So, you know, you need to talk about Golden Aces with Ibushi and Tanahashi. You need to talk about, you know, Golden Lovers teaming together again in this sort of thing. You need to talk about Kenny Omega and Hiroshi Tanahashi teaming, you know, which was the setup originally that we were going to do for Wrestle Dynasty.
Right.
This year. It was originally going to be them, you know, teaming against the Bucks. That was like the original concept before things kind of moved. So all of these things kind of play into this. Then you've got the kind of elements with having, you know, Ospreay teaming with Tanahashi, Ibushi teaming again with Tanahashi in terms of the political element as well. You know, who left New Japan rather unceremoniously and now teaming with their president. So you can play on all of these different aspects, but it's like you have to kind of throw that in, and now you've got to do it quick, right? Which is very traditional Forbidden Door sense. But
oh yeah, there's anything about Forbidden Door that's been consistent from year to year. It's how quick these builds have come.
Yeah, and it's weird because you've actually got some extended builds this time. You know, you've got the Max Page thing has been building since All In, right? Yes. Gradually, they've played through it. It's kind of snuck up on some people, but in general, you can see how that's kind of built. Tony and Athena has built all the way from All In. Swerve and Okada has attempted to build all since All In. I don't. They've just never figured out the kind of formula and how to get a TV build up Okada yet, and I don't know if they will, but that's just where we are with that. So you've had those longer things, but then obviously we're throwing this major thing together, and it'll work because it's a gimmick match, right? It's fine and that, but you've kind of got to try and put some emphasis on some of these stories very quickly in this last week now. And so the idea is obviously to go with like Moxley and Will on that first bit, but that's not what's leading you past there. Is Will even going to be around after Forbidden Door? There's lots of people who don't think he is. So it's like, it's a weird kind of combination to kind of put together. And I think if you're Hangman and Max as well, you're going to be pretty pissed off that you're the guys who've kind of carried the TV out of it, and especially number-wise, and you're not the guys main eventing. And, you know, that's pissed off in a competitive sense, right? They should be.
Sure. Like,
not in a, like, oh, we hate AEW. Don't put words in my mouth.
No,
But it's like,
God,
no, but you should be competitive. Like, why the fuck are you're doing this to us? Right, fine, we'll do this. But it's kind of an interesting one, and I think the Gabe Kidd bit is a harder element. So this is a guy that, so he hyperextended his knee after Takeshita actually, accidentally lands on it in the first match in the G1. He's then, steps back and can't compete in the rest of the tournament, and then his first match back isn't in Ariake Arena this weekend, or, defending his global title or doing whatever. It's in this 5 versus 5. So not been a popular decision, legitimately, in New Japan. And you can see why. So it's one of those things, but he's that extra element kind of thrown in. And, look, that transition's coming, right? I think we all know that. So he probably needs an important role, because I don't think that the way he's been presented so far at AEW has kind of made him look like as big a deal as anywhere close as what the start of the year in New Japan did. So that's another element as well, and you play off that with Kenny Omega. So yeah, you've just got to throw these elements in together, and it'll probably work for one night, and I guess it doesn't really matter, but then you've got to get that turnover quickly into the next show. So I just think it was a strange one, but then it opened up Hiromu to face Carl Fletcher, so I'm not moaning because he wasn't getting that spot before. So that's kind of cool, and that's like a more traditional Forbidden Door match. So last time we talked about potentially the talk about what was coming around, how people would feel about Forbidden Door not being really Forbidden Door anymore.
Yeah.
So, I've always said it's an AEW show with New Japan wrestlers on, right? I think that's been my line for 3 years now. But now, they're very much saying it's an AEW show with New Japan wrestlers on. What do you think of kind of the discussion and how people feel kind of around that?
I don't know. It's always challenging when you have these cross-promotional discussions, because people seem to think that there's going to be some kind of utopia world where everyone is equal and no one will attempt to exert influence or, have their wrestlers do better or whatever. And I'm always kind of like, there's a reason why certain companies have avoided any cross-promotional, events. These are difficult to book. They're difficult to manage. They're negotiations. Yes, in a perfect world, would it be great to see Hangman versus Zack Sabre Jr. for all of the belts? Sure. That's never going to happen. Okay, well, you don't want to. Actually, that probably wouldn't be a very good match, but whatever. But
it'd be fine. It'd be good. In his own way.
They don't feel like those guys have good wrestling chemistry. But these are always going to be negotiations, right? About who's going to view who and whatever. My criticisms are, I think there are criticisms that you can have about the build for this while appreciating certain things. I think that the whole Nigel McGuinness versus Zack Sabre Jr. for the IWGP has been kind of ridiculous. I appreciate that AEW wants to have someone go up for the belt that can afford to lose. I get that. But I think, and I appreciate that, you're not going to be able to do too much with ZSJ because he's been in Japan doing the G1. He hasn't been available to you. I certainly think that from your own storytelling perspective, you could have done more with how you're building this four-way than what you ended up doing. And yes, I appreciate that there was developments last night. It looks like we might have a Daniel Garcia's heel turn, et cetera, et cetera. You just would have liked to have seen that started to have built before last night, right? But at the same time, this idea of this promotion's more dominant and this promotion's more dominant, I think I can see where I certainly have an empathy and an understanding for why New Japan fans would not be super impressed by these cards or the way that these shows are built. But I also think that you do have to look back again to being this is an AEW show with New Japan wrestlers. And once you kind of put it in that perspective, things make a little bit more sense. If you're thinking of this as two equal partners doing a show together, that is just not the case. And I don't think maybe the first year it was, but even that, since then it sure hasn't been.
No, the presentation, the first year they had the presentation as in this is a joint show, right?
Yes.
And the second year you could see it start to slip, and the last year you could see that it was moving. Yeah. And this year it might have to still have, both companies present, but it's very clear that it's an AEW show. And they have different things, that they're looking at as well, because from an AEW perspective, one, it's a big show at the O2. They charge big prices at the start that are now down to much lower, but most tickets were sold at a big price. It's a huge gate. And your biggest investment is Wembley Stadium next year. That's going to be your hardest task. It's a third year in that stadium. It's an expensive stadium to host events in. But also especially because of the bright red fucking seating, it's not one that you can leave half empty, right? You can see it. It's on the most visually kind of it's not it's much different to, you could see much less if there was anything empty in the ballpark in July than what you will see at Wembley. So that's a priority. So you must deliver on this show because you want people to be excited to buy tickets to Wembley on the initial onset or not be chasing your fucking tail all year. So that's really important to them. And that is their primary goal. As much as it is delivering a joint show in New Japan or with New Japan wrestlers on, that's not the primary goal is to sell this pay-per-view, sell the O2, and then sell Wembley next year. So that is the priority. And it's hard because I think if you are primarily a New Japan fan, you're going to look at this show and think, well, it's not a New Japan show, but it says it's a New Japan show on the top. But then that's no different to Wrestle Dynasty, and we spoke about that at the time, you know.
Yep.
But that presentation was probably better in terms of how it looks, because it was like New Japan presents this show, and then we have our partners, you know, there's the CML logo, there's the Ring of Honor logo, there's the AEW logo. That probably would have worked better in this case as well. I guess why they don't want to do that and move away from that kind of presentation. But it's just one of them things where I keep telling people, and I was like, I don't mean it nasty, but you have to accept that this is an AEW show, you know, and you have to look at it that way.
I think that I get, if you're a New Japan fan, I get why, primarily a New Japan fan, and I agree that there are people that are fans of both promotions. But if you're primarily a New Japan fan, I get why you would want Tony Khan to care as much about your promotion as he does about his own. But I also think to some degree that's kind of unfair. I think there's arguments that could be made about certain things being handled better? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, like you said, he has to care about his promotion first. And, you know, that's not unreasonable for him to do that.
No, I think it's just a line of kind of being honest about what it is. I guess
Right.
that's the question about it, is that we're presenting it as something that it's not. And that's fine. Like, and for most people, they'll just see it like that anyway, because they want to see Okada, they want to see Tanahashi. You know, they'll want to see Hiromu because he was associated with LIJ in that period. It's like, they want to see...
Affiliated.
Oh, they have a cool entrance now. Have you seen their cool entrance?
No, I have not seen their cool entrance. I'm going to go look this up. You would send it to me.
They have, like, the cool lights, and it's all... And they light them up, and Hiromu likes to dance to Suji's theme. I quite like it. Hiromu's playing around in Noah, so that's how he feels about New Japan at the moment. But...
Everything's going great over there.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. But that's a lead across, because it's not just Forbidden Door, is it? It's not just the Gabe Kidd thing. So everyone's, you know, that's probably the worst transition of anybody going from New Japan to AEW in the lead up, is what's happened with Gabe Kidd this year. So that's kind of a frustrating element. Then you've got, you know, we've got something going, you know, we've got the G1 this weekend. And I haven't talked about the G1 because we're going to do something about the G1 coming up shortly. So I've stolen somebody else to help with that because I didn't want you to sit over board for 2 hours.
So it shouldn't be me. I should not be discussing the G1. I do not have the ability to watch the G1. I, you know, can follow along with some of it, but you deserve to have a show with someone who's going to have a good conversation with you, and our listeners deserve a show with someone who can have a better conversation about New Japan and the G1 than me.
We just take advantage of people that have, like, who have been to shows, you know, who are experiencing them, and we can get that viewpoint. So that's what we're going to do with that. But what I am going to talk about with the G1 is so Takeshita wins the G1 this morning. Spoiler for anyone, it's Tuesday by the time you get this. Come on now. But he wins the G1 this morning. Okay. And I almost felt sorry for him because this is where the difficulties of this kind of relationship kick in, and it's the same when we talk about potentially, you know, dual contacts with CMLL. And how that might impact. Now you've got Hechicero, dual contracted, potentially Mascara Dorada, you know, then probably others as well. But this is where one of them. So you have a guy who is triple contracted, right? And when he was triple contracted back in January, you know, Kadani and that spoke about he can have everything. And we knew he was going to get a monster push. And then you build him up for it. And this is the same issues as we talked about when Zack took the title from Goto back in June, right? You could see how they built it on paper. You could see, like, oh, he beat Finlay, you know, in Windy City Riot, and he had the draw in California with Goto, and then he won this and he won that. But there was actually no real build. In fact, he was just kind of in the background. He wasn't really doing anything. And then when it happened, it was like, what are we doing, you know? And this is very, very similar. So you can see it on paper. You know, he was the guy that was, you know, showcased on both shows back in January. You know, with the Never Belt, you know, with Shingo, with Ishii, you know, your two kind of best match merchants in recent years in, you know, heavyweights in New Japan. So he has that. Then, you know, he's the US last match for Tanahashi. And he wins that. And then, you know, you can feel the kind of momentum for it, and you think, okay, you can see where they were going for that. They were going to put him in a big spot in this G1. But they present him as AEW's Takeshita.
Yes.
Right? They're not presenting him as in he's our New Japan guy as well. That literally, if you watch a video, even just as you come into the G1 final, it's like AEW's Takeshita. And even his character, when he's doing the stuff in the press conference at the start of the tour, he's talking about, I'm not here to save New Japan. I'm just, I love professional wrestling, but so he's associated with this other brand. So they look at this result, a lot of kind of New Japan fans, and it is split. But I think this is something that's holding Takeshita back. Because, and then, there's been lots of talk about, he's not developing as a draw there yet, but he's not going to because they don't always see him as their guy. So they're looking at this company abroad and they're looking at these cards like Forbidden Door, and it's like, oh, it's not really our card. And they're looking at all his talent have gone there. And that's not to say that they blame AEW. But for Takeshita, I think it's hurting him a little bit there in his presentation that he's the AEW wrestler coming in Invader. And then they completely fucked up because then they made him try and make him the babyface in this against Evil, who's been there for his entire career. Is LIJ affiliated in the past, which is, a natural thing that's going to win over parts of that crowd because of, how much people love that faction over the last decade. So you then put him in this position where you could have... I get you want to give him a G1. I don't know if they will give him the belt or not. I'm not 100%. Probably they will. I think they probably will. We knew Zack wasn't going to go into Wrestle Kingdom with it, right? Well, definitely wasn't going to wrestle the G1 winner there. We've known that for a little while. But it's like you're not giving him that basis. And then what people look at is this kind of dual, triple contract stuff. Because he's not able to spend his entire time in one company. And that's the biggest Japanese fan complaint. It's not about AEW in the presentation that he's an AEW wrestler. It's the fact that he's only doing the big shows and this is the first full tour that he's done. He wasn't there for the New Japan Cup. He wasn't there for the entire New Beginning tour. He wasn't there for this. And that's where you have to manage that. So if you're going to put people in these big positions, like how do you make it so they see them as their wrestler and not an invader coming from another company, especially when you're going to try and present them as a babyface. I actually felt sorry for him in a little way in terms of like that because you can see the wear on him this tour particularly.
Yeah.
He looks knackered at the end of this tour, and I don't think he's had the greatest health weekend in that regard either. So it's like he's battling through it, and this is the biggest moment of your career. It is absolutely the biggest moment of your career. And especially for a DDT wrestler to come in and win the G1. There's only been 3 finals previously contended by DDT wrestlers. I think 2 Ibushi, 1 Omega. I think that's C1, 2. Yeah, it's just them 3. It's just Ibushi, Omega, and Takeshita, who have won G1s coming from DDT. So it's like it's a huge achievement, but it's underlined because the execution has been fucking awful. So you've not told the right story with him going through this tournament, and then you switched it at the end. And now we're in a position where you're going to be challenging Zack Sabre Jr., who is a dickhead heel, who finally had some character developed by taking the belt off Goto. And now we're having to flip it back. You've got Zack chasing around Ren Narita to absolute fucking silence in the semi-main event. Because that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Ren beat him and he's young and that sort of thing. But the dynamics are wrong. And now you've got, potentially, the biggest babyface coming off their show today was Evil. And I know, people don't want to say, and it was a mixed response. But every time he goes for everything as Evil, they go fucking apeshit. They're literally, as soon as they try and cheer for Takeshita when they do the interference spots at the start, and that breaks up any kind of evil chants. As soon as it's the 2 of them, there's quite a few evil chants. And every time Takeshita gets control in a visible way, they boo and they chanting evil. And I just thought, how have you fucked this so badly? This guy, we talked about at the start of the year. Yeah, this guy could be pinnacle for New Japan, but he needs to be there. He has to be there now.
Yeah.
For the end of this year. He's going up for that belt. What are we looking at? No, it's King of Pro Wrestling. Especially that show's going to get a lot of attention because Noah's running there in the same month as well. So you're going to get tons of attention on which show's going to do better, King of Pro Wrestling or the Noah show that's running in Ryogoku as well. So you have to deliver on that. So he needs to be there for those tours. You cannot have him come back to AEW for a month and then go back for that show. It's only going to make his world more difficult. And I think this is where we're starting to see these kind of geopolitical kind of wrestling kind of war kicking in terms of these relationships and how that affects things. And we've seen it with TNA as well. TNA doing their invader thing that no fans believe in. They just cheer the NXT guys. But it's like, it's the same thing. Like, so it's the difficulties of having these relationships and making like that, and making sure that you manage the talent as well. That's the only thing when you look at Takeshi like this week. It's like the amount of work that he's going through in order to make all these things work. Is it sustainable? I guess you just worry about, you know, make sure he's looked after as well in that regard. But yeah, just it's New Japan at the moment. Look, like none of it really makes sense. But then again, you know, we'll see how the end of the year shapes out, and if we end up with Takeshita fighting Shota Umino then at the Dome, then well, I don't know. One other thing as well is so one match that is on Forbidden Door next week is FTR or Brodito. I would prefer Brodito because I think a new fresh team in tag belts would be much more interesting than throwing it into a nostalgia match, but we'll see. Against the Hurt Syndicate, who have they so we teased this a little bit headlines. And then we teased it and then everyone kind of threw it open, so we don't really need to tease it anymore.
We don't have to tease it anymore.
No, it's kind of funny. But have they cut a promo live on TV since All In?
They have not. I think what I find more interesting than any discussion of who likes or dislikes who backstage is who's on TV and who is not. And I think when you look at the television screen and you can see, I think, 4 or 5 backstage segments for the Hurt Syndicate, very quick backstage segments, and then one brawl where nobody talked. They're getting a lot less TV time than they had before All In, and a lot less live mic time than they had before All In. And meanwhile, Jet Speed is all over the television, pretty much in matches every Dynamite. So
endorsed by Jon Moxley and Adam Page last week.
Endorsed by Jon Moxley and Adam Page last week, working with pretty much the top of the card. I think that sort of says, you know, you want to have conversations about where people are at and everything else. Like, again, from my perspective, nobody needs to be, this is kind of the stuff sometimes where I'm like, nobody needs to be telling you anything. You should be able to look at your television and figure out where some of this shit is, right? Ideally, you aren't, but, and this is kind of lighthearted backstage stuff that, you know, nobody's going to die. It's not the end of the world. People aren't barging into other people's, you know, faces and, you know, attacking them and whatever in dressing rooms. This is just sort of straightforward wrestler shit. But I think the fact that, you know, the report that Jacob put out, I think it's almost 2 weeks ago now, was that, you know, Tony might be over Hurt Syndicate as a group, was sort of the way he put it. And I think the lack of TV time and the positioning that we can see right now, like, this isn't about, you know, I'd be shocked if they hold on to these titles beyond Forbidden Door. I sort of expect FTR to win them because I also think FTR are going to drop them to Cope and Christian. I
just think it'd be much more interesting if you put them on Brody King and Bandito.
I don't disagree with you. I think you'd be better off with that, but
they won't.
You know,
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen, but at least not right now.
Sure.
I think you'd get better matches, that's for damn sure. But who knows? So yeah, so that's one of those things where, like, it's one of those things kind of funny to keep an eye on. A lot more important stuff came up, obviously, like the Brock Lesnar stuff, which is a bigger story. But it's certainly something that we sort of, you know, this is, you know, like we said, this is not stuff that we hadn't heard about for a while now.
It's been coming all year. We say it. We had many arguments where people were like, no. We were like,
they're great. They're great. Everybody loves them. They're great.
All right. But it all comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? You know, unless you kind of want to play ball in AEW, you will struggle. And it will happen eventually. Yeah, it might not be straight away. You might be able to get away with it straight away, but you have to, you know, you can't look at yourself as above the company. And that's how it works there. And if you do that, then you'll be found out sooner rather than later. Maybe the exception of Adam Copeland, who I don't fucking know.
Well, I think fans are kind of onto that at this point.
Fans are onto it, yeah, but, you know, he still gets...
That's where that is.
God knows. But yeah, it's, MVP looked pretty subdued on his Collision promo, I guess to say. It's an interesting one to watch, but...
It's not about them. You know, as I said to somebody else, I can't envision that Tony Khan would be happy that he paid for Mimero and MVP talked over it for pretty much the entirety of it during the entrance at All In. But I appreciate that. I appreciate that WWE is a tough environment and a difficult space to try to get yourself over and maintain, and you got to do whatever. But people in AEW, for the most part, seem to be more successful and be given more opportunities and bigger programs when they're willing to play ball and occasionally take a loss. And
the biggest programs they have are the ones where people work together successfully.
Yeah.
Not against each other.
Right.
So. There you go. Yeah. All right. Well.
That's our show.
That's our show. Forbidden Door next week. I'm hoping we might have something very funny on that show that I've been bullying people into.
I would like it to be something that happens. I will say that much.
Yes.
If it does, I will be very happy. I will pop.
You got to get through all the red tape, and but if it does, I will be the saddest person just punching the air in that arena where everyone's like, "What the fuck's wrong with you?" But let's see how we go. So this has been the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast. You can find us on Red Circle and all your other podcast providers, where you can listen every 2 weeks. You can also find a wonderful Tunnel Talk. Hooray! Woo! Home of our producer Leah, who does an incredible job sorting us all out, especially last time because I completely screwed up everything technology-wise again. It's just an incredible job to make that happen and get that out on time. So very much thank you. But you can listen to Tunnel Talk every Sunday on your favourite podcast provider. You can find all of us on the Social Suplex Discord. Come and talk to fellow wrestling fans and all the hosts about whatever you wish. Find out about the rabbits.
You've got your thing, and I'm going to fucking interrupt you, but I got to say, this week, this Discord has been on fire. We have had some really, really intelligent, thoughtful, wide-ranging wrestling discussions in our channel, and I just want to give a shout-out to everybody in there and say how much I've enjoyed this. I told them all this when it was happening, but I really enjoy the conversations everybody be having. And, if you're interested, please feel free to stop by, because I think it's one of the better communities in wrestling, and I really enjoy talking to everybody in there, so...
And I'm going to come in when you're on one of your night shifts, because you're my new night chaos maker, have you noticed? I come in and I'm not acknowledging that. I'm not acknowledging it. It's just not happening. I'm not acknowledging it.
Don't.
It
does get a little crazy in there in the overnight hours.
Yeah. UK overnight hours, just, nah. No, it's all good. But yeah, come and join us in there. We're always in kind of... ready to talk whatever you want,
just
you want in the world.
Just not fucking Karrion Kross.
Yeah, he's
We're not
banned.
talking about
we
that.
We banned him.
That discussion is ended.
Yeah, we banned him from this podcast and we banned him from the Discord.
Yeah, no discussion of fucking Karrion Kross.
You can also contact us if you wish for anything else at trishandsarahpod@gmail.com, trishandsarahpod@gmail.com, at Trish and Sarah on Twitter, not saying X, I have enough trouble writing it, or our individual names on Blue Sky. And check out the Social Suplex newsletter, now coming out on a Friday. We're going to move into the end of the week, just to make things more manageable. I will have a piece on the Brock Lesnar situation on there. I think it's the first thing I put my written name to this week. I thought it was really important to do, so that will be a thing for this week. You can also support us and everyone else on the network at chopped-tees.com/Trish and Sarah or /Social Suplex. We will be back in 2 weeks. Plenty of more developments, I'm sure. Never quiet, is it?
Never quiet.
But yeah, very much I want to say thank you very much for all the feedback and support from the last episode as well, because it was very difficult for us to kind of figure out what to do in that situation. So we decided to, we'll put the kind of warning on and leave the content as it was. And very much appreciate kind of everything that came back for us after that. And okay. Well, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Trish.
I've been Sarah.
And this has been the Trish and Sarah Wrestling Podcast.
Lowe's knows to bring your vision to life, it's important to find the right color. That's why MyLowe's Rewards members get a free Valspar paint or exterior stain sample to test your look to confidently refresh your space. Offer valid in-store only 8/7 to 8/20. Limit 1 per customer while supplies last. Discount taken at time of purchase. See associate for details. Rewards program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.